Thank you for coming. I'm Dr. Marilyn Mobley, Vice President for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Power of Diversity lecture series. I want to tell you a little bit about the series, but before I do that, I wanted to share some upcoming events that we think you might enjoy. On Friday the 3rd, the Diversity 360 program is hosting a Lunch and Learn, and the Lunch and Learn topic is what is accommodation, understanding and accommodating students with disabilities. This is going to take place Friday, November 3rd, 12:45 to 2. It is a lunch and learn. That means lunch and learn, and lunch will be served, and it's going to be in Twing room 224. So if you can join us for that, we would love to see you. The session will include open dialogue facilitated by Kaylee Smitley and Edwin Mays, who is the director of the first year experience. Kaylee Smitley is accommodations coordinator in the Office of Disability Resources. So part of our goal in the Office for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity is to create opportunities for the campus to learn about the breadth of human differences, including disability. So we hope you can join us for that. And we hope you can join us for the next Power of Diversity lecture, which will feature Monica Webb Hooper. There are flyers in the back for you to take with you. She's the CWRU Professor of Oncology, Psychological Sciences, Family Medicine, and Community Health. She will be talking about We Are Not Low-Hanging Fruit, Meaningful Science to Address Racial Disparities in Tobacco Cessation. That's going to be Thursday, November 9th. One of the newer members of the School of Medicine faculty. I've had the pleasure of meeting her, and I look forward to giving you an opportunity to hear about her research. Which takes me to what the Power of Diversity series is. We originally started this series without a name. It was just a diversity lecture series, and it was designed to give our faculty an opportunity to share their research, their teaching, or any service they were doing connected to diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. So that's how we began this series of showcasing our own faculty. Then, thanks to the Diversity Leadership Council's input, we decided we didn't want to only include our faculty, but we wanted to include our staff. And so last academic year, we began including staff. We had Dean Patterson as our first staff member who presented. Liz Roccaforte from the LGBT Center has presented. And today we have someone from the International Affairs Office who will present to us. We added, the second year we did it, national thought leaders. And we wanted to make it clear that by adding national thought leaders, we were not, this is an expression I learned from a colleague, we were not throwing shade on our own faculty. So we believe we have distinguished faculty and staff who are subject matter experts, and today we have a subject matter expert who's going to present to us. And we appreciate the ways in which adding national thought leaders has given the profile of this series even more attention. But we believe that our own faculty and staff have a great deal to tell us. And today we have Molly Watkins. Molly Watkins is the Executive Director for International Affairs in the Case Western Reserve University Center for International Affairs, a position she has held since July 2011. As Executive Director, she works with the Office for International Affairs, directs the Office of Education Abroad, and supports efforts in the Office of Global Strategy. Watkins also works with the Vice Provost for International Affairs, David Fleshler, on identifying and implementing strategic initiatives to support internationalization efforts at Case Western Reserve University. And I can tell you from the presentations I've heard David do for the Faculty Senate and for the Board of Trustees, this is an area in which we are making great progress to internationalize the campus on your watch and David Fleshler's watch. This is happening. Watkins serves on the Institute of International Education's Global Engineering Education Exchange Executive Committee and is a member of NASFA, the Association of International Educators. She's also a member of the Association of International Education Administrators the Forum on Education Abroad, and the Ohio Board of Regents Globalization Committee. Prior to Case Western Reserve, Watkins served as Director of International Education at Mississippi State University. While there, she designed and coordinated the International Studies minor. Oh, I didn't know about that. And developed the Study Abroad program. In addition, she was the founding chair of the Mississippi Association of International Educators and served as chair of the organization from 2002 to 2004. She also served as president of the Alabama Mississippi Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages, TESOL, in 2004, and was on the Southeastern TESOL Regional Conference Planning Team in 2005. In addition, Watkins served in the Peace Corps, where she taught English at a university in rural China for 2 years. She has a BA in Communications and an MA in English. Please join me in welcoming Molly, who has a wonderful topic for us today, the value of global diversity during tumultuous times. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be here to talk about this. When I was asked to do this in July, this topic just seemed really easy. And then as we got closer, I thought, oh my gosh, everybody that's going to go there knows what global diversity is and why it's valuable. I have nothing to add to the conversation that people don't already know. But I started thinking about the times that we're in today and how it's maybe unique in these times that we really need to pay attention to global diversity where we didn't need to before. But I like to start with a story. And so I'm going to tell a story about one of my students. So I was at Mississippi State for a long time, and so a lot of my stories are from Mississippi State University because I worked really directly with students in that role. And one of my students, right there in the middle, and I have his permission to use the photo, is, just so you know, his name is Yu. And Yu is from Japan, and he came to the intensive English language program where I was working. And he was there for 2 years, which is really a long time for an intensive English language program. But he came with almost no English ability. And he was very quiet and very reserved. And part of that was language, but part of that was also the fact that he was quiet and reserved. That was just part of his personality. So there's another student, his name is Dan, and Dan was an engineering student at Mississippi State University. He was from Alabama, so again, Southern roots. Very, very conservative politically, very, very religious, evangelical religion. Very set in the way he was thinking. And one of his teachers, he was in a Japanese class, said, well, if you are a conversation partner in the intensive English language program, you can have extra credit. And he was not doing so well in Japanese. So he's agreed to do this. And he was partnered with Yu Yokoyama. Now, Yu and Dan are atypical. I'm going to tell you that right now. They are not what usually happened, but they became fast friends. They did everything together. They ended up, when Yu finished our program, he went to get a bachelor's in engineering. Dan at that time was a junior. They roomed together. Yu went home every holiday to Dan's family in Alabama, except for the holidays where Dan flew to Japan with Yu's family and hung out with his family. It was this amazing relationship that developed. Certainly not something that we always expected, but was especially unexpected because Dan had never traveled abroad. He had never talked to anyone from another country before that time. And his world changed. But not only his, also his dad. So at one point, something happened at school after he was past our program. And his dad drove all the way, it was about a 4-hour drive to Mississippi State to advocate on behalf of Yu because he knew that Yu's family could not be there to do that. So he impacted the whole family. Now, I thought about Yu recently because on Facebook, which is really my only contact with him now, he just got announced that he got married. And it was really exciting to see. And I was looking through all the comments and the likes that that people do. And I recognized so many of the names from Turkey, from Germany, from South Korea, from the United States, from Japan, obviously. And Dan's name was, of course, one of them that he had commented on it. And Dan's dad had commented and said, it was so nice to see you. Congratulations. And Yu had written back and said, so glad you could come. And it just made me feel so good to think that this pairing, they went to the wedding in Japan and they have this connection. Now, this is a huge success story, and they're not all this great, and we don't expect this all the time. But I think that it's important to see that intercultural connection, global diversity, can change a person's life. It really can be life-changing, and this is just one example of that. I'm going to give a few more examples as we go through, but I think this is one that really highlights and was a special time for me too. So why global diversity? Well, there's friendship. You can make friends. That's pretty basic, right? You can have friends. You can also develop mutual understanding. And that's what happened with you and Dan. They had this mutual understanding. Now, let me clarify. Dan and his family are still extremely conservative. I see Facebook posts because that's how we know about people, right? And they're all very conservative posts, except when it comes to immigration. And it's really interesting that immigration is the one area that they do not have a conservative viewpoint. And I like to think it's because of this mutual understanding that developed. You develop a respect and a sense of global citizenship. And I think that that's really important. And I'm going to tell you why as we move on. I will say that I think that it doesn't happen like this all the time. These kids were just really special. And they really formed a bond, and I can tell you a lot of those stories. But I think that there's potential all the time. So obviously, we were not in tumultuous times at this point. This was in the early 2000s that this occurred. And now we're in tumultuous times. So what does that mean, and are we really in tumultuous times? Well, if you look, a lot of people think the United States right now is in having a lot of stress, right? A lot of stress. There's racial stress, there's immigration stress, there's financial stress. There's a lot going on in the United States. No matter what side you're on, there's a lot of stress. It's not only the United States, though. We're seeing it in Germany, we're seeing it in France, we see it in the Netherlands, where a lot of them are these populist parties that are coming up that are banding together. And as I go through, I'm going to talk a little bit about maybe why that's happening. But a lot of these groups are banding together and feeling free to speak in ways that maybe they haven't felt free to speak in the past. People are feeling that they can share their ideas that maybe they haven't always been able to share. Now, this is not new. You'll notice Japan and China are marked there too, which we don't think of the hotbed of the populist movement, right? But Japan has always been anti-immigration, always. You cannot immigrate and go live in Japan and become a Japanese citizen. You can't do this. China is the same way, very anti-immigration. You can go live there, you can go there, but to actually immigrate and become a citizen or to reside there permanently, extremely difficult. I've never met anyone who's been able to do it. I'm not saying that you can't, but it's very challenging. So they've always been more isolationist. So it's not unique to the United States that we're having this movement. It's happening around the world. I think that there's been tumultuous times, many times in our past. If we look at our history, they're here. But in my lifetime, and certainly in the lifetime of our students, I think these are perhaps the most tumultuous that we've seen. These are some of the most challenging times that we have experienced. And for our students, I think as adults, this is perhaps one of the first times that they're really faced with a lot of challenges and a lot of dialogue that is difficult. And that's why I think global diversity at this time is important. Now, I have to say that, immigration is one I'm going to talk about a little bit today because I think it's an important element of this, to understand why there's anti-immigration ideas. And please know that this is so simplistic. This is a very simplistic look at it. It is a much more nuanced topic. But I think that immigration, one of the anti-immigrant ideas, can be just boiled down to people saying, I should have this, whatever this is, economic security, whether it is more things, more money, more land. I should have something that I don't feel that I have, whatever that is. I don't feel that I have it, but I should have it. So somebody must be taking it away from me. Whether it's health care, whatever it is, somebody must be taking that away from me. In this case, I think some people are saying it's immigrants that are taking this away from me. But it could be any other group. It doesn't have to be immigrants. So stop immigration, stop this other group, and then I will be able to have what I should have, what is rightfully mine. Now, that is very simplistic, but I think that's a lot of what's going on. My family's from rural Missouri, actually. The Boot Heel, Missouri. Anybody know the Boot Heel, Sykeston, Missouri, Cape Girardeau? Teeny, teeny, tiny places. And Cape Girardeau, yeah. And so a lot of people in this area are farmers. My family were farmers. And these are some of the things that they talk about, is that it used to be like this. I used to have these things, and I don't now. And immigrants are taking everything from me. Now, whether or not that's true is immaterial. That's the feeling. And so that's why some of the anti-immigrant attitudes are out there in a very simplistic way. So global diversity. Let's talk a little bit about what this term means. So this morning I was driving in and I called my mom and I told my mom that I was going to do this. And she said, "What's global diversity?" And I went, "Oh, this is my mom who said, define this for me." And I said, "Well, if you watch the live stream, you will know what global diversity is." So if you're watching, hi, Mom. But she's probably not. But so global diversity, I looked in the Oxford Dictionary just to kind of see what does this mean. So if we look at multicultural is different cultures existing peacefully together, working together. It's not an exchange necessarily of culture, but it's an acceptance of culture. So it's different cultures that are existing together. Cross-cultural, you'll notice that you start to see that exchange. You start to see a comparison of cultures, an understanding of different cultures. But I think that the one that we really, and all of these are good and they're all necessary in different areas. So none of these are lesser than, they're just different. Intercultural is the one that I'm going to talk a lot about today because this is where the understanding and the empathy and the compassion between the cultures, this is where it becomes multi-directional, where the different cultures are understanding and learning from each other. And this is the place where if you are truly intercultural, you cannot help but be transformed. It's impossible to stay the same once you become intercultural because you have learned. You have grown from this. Now, intercultural does not mean that you understand every cultures. And being a multicultural person or having understanding of cross-cultural, please note, it does not mean that you have a knowledge or understanding of every culture that is out there. That's just not possible. It's just not possible. It's very difficult to have a complete understanding of one other culture aside from our own. So that's not the possible. It's the understanding and compassion and empathy that makes the difference here. And that's what we should strive for. And that's what we should strive for in our students. So I have another story because I like stories. So this one, there were these, when I was living in married student housing, so the apartment was, a fourth of this room size, cinder block apartment. My husband and I lived there. We were in Mississippi, so in the summer it was really hot, in the winter it was cold, but I didn't know what cold was till I moved here, so I thought it was really cold. And so we were living in this married student housing, and most of the people that lived in married student housing were from other countries because most graduate students were not married. I was one of the ones that was, and so we were both graduate students. We lived there. And there was a group of women who were from Saudi Arabia. I didn't know that's where they were from at the time, but they were with their families out on the playground, and they were wearing full burqas. Now, I couldn't take pictures of them because that's not appropriate, which is why I have an outline here. But it's not appropriate to take a picture of a woman in a full burqa. And so I never got a picture of them. But when I first looked out my window, I'm ashamed to say that I thought, who are these people? And this is pre-9/11, pre any of the stereotypes that have come on since. But I was a little scared. They were different. They were dressed entirely in black, and I didn't know what to think about them. And they were there every morning with their kids. I didn't have kids, so I wasn't out on the playground, but I would watch them in the morning as I was getting ready. And I was also teaching English comp, and I had some international students. And so I thought, I should go talk to them. That would be the good thing to do. I should go say something. So after a few months, I got up the nerve to go out. And one morning I stopped on the way and I said hi. And I started doing that every morning. I just started saying hi as I walked by, and they all said hi back, and it was fine. And then we started a conversation. And over the course of a year, I actually became friends with this group of about 5 women. It was really hard for me because it was so outside of my comfort zone to do this. It didn't seem outside of their comfort zone at all. So they were perfectly comfortable. But for me, I really had to work at it at first. And then I became friends with these women. And we started out, and so initially we were in that multicultural stage to where I accepted that they were out on the playground and I was in my place, and we accepted, and there was no judgment, and we were fine, and we existed. And then we began this cross-cultural connection. And then one day we were talking about something, and they were complaining about their husbands, and I thought, oh my gosh, I have the same complaints about my husband. And I realized that there's not that many differences between us, and that we still complain about the same things. And we don't like the fact that it's cold, because they thought it was cold too, in the winter. We don't like that. So then they invited me to come over to their house for a Thursday night party. They were having a party Thursday night. So I went over to their home, and one of the persons who was hosting, her husband was still there, and so she kicked him out, really kicked him out, said, you must leave now, and closed the door, pulled the shades, locked it, and they all disappeared. And I thought, where did everybody go? I'm sitting here in this living room, everybody disappeared. And then these 5 women that I had never met before, I was sure, came out without their burqas. And it was shocking to me because they had more hair and makeup done than I had ever imagined could possibly be under the burqa. They played loud music, and it was the wildest party I had ever been to without alcohol in my entire college career. It was so different because there were no men there, and they could be without their burqa. And after I got over the shock, which was about an hour into the party, I'm a slow learner a little bit, I started asking them about it, and they said, this is how we always are. This is who we are all the time, even in the burqa. It's just you don't see that. All you see is the burqa. And it was so transformative for me to realize that we look at what's on the outside, and I thought it was being such a great U.S. citizen going and being an ambassador to these women, and they taught me so much more about looking underneath the burqa and seeing what's there. And I am reminded of them because they helped to increase my awareness, and they helped to increase my global diversity in the way that I looked at things. And that's a valuable lesson that I certainly will never forget and have not forgotten, and it's been about 20 years. So it's one that has stayed with me. And I asked him one time, why, you're in the United States, have you ever thought about not wearing the burqa? We were very good friends at this point, so I felt like we could have an honest conversation. And I remember the woman said to me, my husband told me not to wear it anymore. He said that it wasn't safe if I continued to wear it. And he said I should not wear it in the United States. But I feel safe in it. And then she proceeded to say, and American women, they wear awful clothes. And I thought, well, okay, so at least we've got some standards here. But she felt safe in it. And her husband was telling her not to, but she wanted to. And I thought it was such an interesting exchange for me to learn. Now, these stories are all going to connect later as we talk about why this is important for our students in these tumultuous times to have this global diversity. Because I think that students, and I was a student then, when you're a student, you are open to the most change. So now we're going to get to a little bit of theory here. So the college campus is unique. It is a time when students are changing and growing and becoming different people. And so Chickering's identity development theory, anybody familiar with Chickering's identity development? Couple people. All right. So Chickering is like the standard in student development theory. If you've studied student development theories, Chickering is like way up there. And he talks about 7 different vectors that students go through as they develop who they are. And so they start with developing competence, and then they learn to manage their emotions and who they are. And they go through these 7 vectors. The one that I think is most relevant is Vector 4, which is developing mature interpersonal relationships. So this is the time when they start to see beyond themselves. So moving through autonomy to interdependence, they begin this process. They begin to look, it's not just about me. There's other people that are connected in this. But then they start to form these deep relationships. And this happens in college. It's the most common time, and that can happen any time in a person's life. But a lot of this is happening in college. They're forming these relationships, these interpersonal relationships. It's where they start to understand that others are different and appreciate those differences. So this is the time that they are primed to do this. So what better time to incorporate global diversity to help to expand who they are than when they're in college and they're right in this stage where they're starting to form these relationships and develop their full identity. Now, you don't have to just stop with Chickering. You can also look at Schlossberg's transition theory. So Schlossberg talked about transitions and about how transitions were very important for people and that we all go through transitions. And this is not just when you're in college, any transition. The death of a loved one, the birth of a child. My daughter just went through one going from 4th to 5th grade. Any of these are transitions that you can go through. Well, I don't think any of us would argue that college is a big transition time, right? A lot of transitions happening at the university level. So Schlossberg talked about the 4 S's: self, situation, support, and strategy. And so first you've got yourself. So you've got who are you and what do you bring to the table? So what's your family background? What are your demographics? Where are you from? All these are elements of self that you bring to the table. And then you've got the situation. What situations have you been in your life that you can bring to this transition to help transfer the knowledge? Right? So what experiences can you draw upon to relate to your transition? And then your support, who are your support structures? And then what strategies do you have to get you through the transition? So those are the 4 S's that you go through. And Schlossberg argued that everybody goes through these, and it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, it's more of a circular pattern that you're going through. So just this morning, actually, I was talking to my husband who was talking about he's a professor at Baldwin Wallace University, and he talks about diversity issues with his computer science students. And he says that one of the things that he talks about is problem solving, which can be attributed similar to transition. And I think of the situation element with problem solving. And he said, if everybody that's in the group trying to solve the computer program is from the same background, they can get about this far. It's only when you bring in other backgrounds and you bring in new viewpoints that people start looking into things differently, and then you can get to the top of the mountain. And I think that that's one of the things. If your situational experience that you bring to a transition is this big, you really are going to have a more difficult time in life doing these transitions. And so one of the ways that you can increase your situational knowledge and your concept of self to help you go through transitions is to have global diversity and have different experiences. All right, one more theory and then I'm done. So this is Perry's theory of intellectual and ethical development. So Perry talked about how people develop ethically, how they develop intellectually. And I like it because it's pretty easy to understand, and there's pretty good examples. So dualism is everything's right or wrong, black or white, up or down. It's very clear. My daughter says, Mommy, tell me who are the bad people and who are the good people, right? She's 7. So, everything is this way or that way. And actually, she's moving now a little bit into multiplicity, where she's realizing that good people can have bad things and bad, that it's not this duality. But we start off with this idea of duality, right? That everything is one way or another. And I kind of think that we've, as a country, regressed into a little bit of duality. No matter which side of the political aisle you are on. And so I grew up in Mississippi, was in Mississippi for a long time. So I have a lot of friends who are on they have very conservative views. I also have a lot of friends from Cleveland who maybe don't have such conservative views. And sometimes this is really amazing to see the interaction of these two on Facebook. Now, I'm going to use a couple of Facebook examples as we go through. I actually never post or do anything, but I stalk all the time on Facebook. It's really fascinating. And what I see is this idea of this group is good, this group is bad. And so we've kind of gone into this dualism that I think we, as a culture, is not very healthy. But multiplicity is where you see things a little bit grayer. You start to expand beyond that. And relativism takes it a step further. In relativism, you realize that there are different, even in the gray, there are different meanings and different answers. It's more advanced, that it's much more complex than you thought. It's not that there's multiple answers, there's multiple answers upon multiple answers upon multiple answers. And then commitment is where you decide, how do I feel about this? And you kind of take a stand. This is how I'm going to feel about this. And I think that there's some things that we have made mental commitments to, and some we haven't, and we go through, and some we maybe never will. And I think that there's also in my mind, I always call it the revolving commitment. It's really the evolving commitment, where this can change because we learn new information and we grow. So students are going through this. They're usually in the multiplicity relativism stages when they're in college, but they're moving to commitment. Some are already in different attitudes. So again, the point of this talk is, why is global diversity important, especially in these times? In the college years, students are going through all of these things. They're forming their intellectual and ethical development. They're forming their identity. They're going through a transition. It's important that they get exposed to as many different things to help them form the best self that they can be. And if we can't expose our students, then they don't have the opportunity to become the best that they can be. And we want them to be their best selves. So now a little bit of data. I've gone through theory, now we're going to talk about data. So let's talk about student mobility. This is one that I like to talk about a lot. So one of the ways that students can gain global diversity is going abroad, right? Going abroad is good. So you'll see that this is data from 2014-15 on students in the United States going abroad. This is from the Open Doors report, and you'll see it's just going right up. It's great. You also notice it's 2014-15. The 2015-16 data comes out next week. If only I could have waited 1 week, I could have gone. But it's not quite out yet. So this is what's happening with study abroad 2 years ago. Now, I want to show you what's going on with Case Western Reserve University. So it's that top line that you need to look at. This is study abroad at Case Western University. Now, I debated sharing this information. This is new data for us. Now this, you'll notice the 2014-15, we were at our high too. We were pretty high at 45%. And we've been kind of going down with students going abroad since that time. We don't know if that's a national trend because we don't have the data until next week. So I don't want to make a prediction. I know that Fulbright applications this year for students were down 10%. So it would not. You know, that's a great question. I don't know why. I have suspicions. I'm sure there will be lots of studies out as to what's going on. Some of it I think is tumultuous times. I think that it's a little scary to go to Europe now where it used to not be scary to go to Europe.
New York will be just as scary.
New York has always been scary to some students, but now it's going to be scarier right after yesterday. So I think that that's part of it. I think I have an idea of what we're doing as a country. I think we're circling the wagons right now, but I'm going to show that in a minute. But I think that we've got, and this is just projection, I don't know. We're still trying to figure it out. Some of it is maybe is it local to our campus that we're not getting the word out about study abroad. Maybe we're not supporting the students. Maybe we don't offer enough financial help for students who are going abroad. It's probably a combination of all of those. But I think the times we're in are really concerning, and it's harder for students to think, yes, I want to go abroad. I think it's more difficult for them to think that right now, and more importantly, it's more difficult for their parents to think, I want my child to go abroad. So we're still investigating all of this. We are committed to turning this back the other way. But I think I wanted to bring this to you all to show what's going on at Case Western Reserve. Since we're talking about global diversity right now, this is something that we're a little concerned about. International students coming to the United States. So you're seeing international student data, we have 15-16 data. The 16-17 data we'll get next week. So we're seeing that these numbers are going consistently up. It's great. So what's happening at Case Western Reserve University? The same. This is good news, right? So this is 2017, so these are fall numbers right here. So these are very up-to-date numbers. Now we are, it's great news. I think we're having more and more international students here, and I didn't add a slide, but they're from the countries that they're coming from are more varied, and we're trying, that's very intentional, especially on the undergraduate level, trying to get students from a variety of places because we want global diversity. We value this. It's in our strategic plan. Now, I will admit we're concerned about next year. We're really concerned about the numbers for next year. This year, students were already in the pipeline. They had already started applying when things started to get more and more tumultuous. I kind of like that word, so I'll probably use it about 5 more times. But things were getting a little bit, they were already planning to come here. They had already applied. They'd already maybe been accepted when there were executive orders that were put down that made students want to think twice about coming to the United States. But next year, that won't be the case. So we don't know yet if applications are going to be up or down and what we're going to have. But we're concerned, and not just Case Western Reserve, the nation, all universities are concerned that we're going to start seeing a dip. And we've heard that at some campuses, they are already seeing a dip, that it's a mixed bag, that maybe we're a little insulated right now because we're a higher level campus, but some of the campuses that aren't at our level are already seeing the dip. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. On this campus, we are doing things to try to combat this already. If you've heard of the You Are Welcome Here CWRU campaign, is something, oh good, everybody nodded, that's great. That's something that we are trying to get out there. We've got pop-ups, we've had one yesterday, just here in the Tink, we've had them at Nord, we've had them on the Quad, trying to let students know that they are welcome here, that all students are welcome here, that they're valued and that they're important. I should have worn my button, and I'm probably in trouble because I forgot to wear the button, but we have You Are Welcome Here buttons, and we've put out a You Are Welcome Here video. We're working on a new one. It's a major theme of our International Education Week, which is coming up in 2 weeks. So we're doing a lot to try to show students that they really are welcome at Case Western Reserve University. And the silver lining of some of the negative things that have happened is I think our students are being more civil and caring toward each other, because our students were not happy that they perceived different groups were being targeted. And many of our students, undergraduate studies, many of our graduate groups have stood up for other groups of students and said, and come to us and said, what are you going to do about it? And I love that. I think that is a really nice thing to see from our students, that they are active and that they are interested. But this, having international students on our campus, having students be able to go abroad and go back and forth, these are all important parts of global diversity and what we can do at Case Western Reserve University. So I have another story because, you know, I like stories. So this is about Cassie. And Cassie was a student at Mississippi State University who worked in housing. And I think working in housing has got to be a tough job, because everybody's, I see some nods, so maybe worked in housing before. People don't like the rooms they have. People, you know, they don't always behave the way that they should behave. I think it's got to be a tough job. So she worked in housing, and she had several of my students with her, my international students. And we had a relationship we had worked on. She was a student, an undergraduate student, but she had been on a task force, a student task force that I had helped to lead at one point. So she would call me and she would say, Molly, all the international students do this wrong. Why do they do this? Molly, all the international students act like this, and different examples. And I put on my best patience and said, well, let's think. Is it really all the students, or is it one student, or is it what's really going on? Have you asked them? Because she would say, what do I do? Have you talked to the students that are causing the problem? Well, no. well, maybe that's a place to start, is have a conversation. And we just talked through it. And she did. She would go talk to students, and she got better, and she got more understanding with talking to students. She did not like it. She never liked working with students in housing, international students in housing. I think she didn't like housing, is what I found out later. I don't know that it was specific to international students, but it was really difficult for her. And she came to me later and she said, okay, I need to be better at this. How can I be better at this? Because I just have no patience for it. And she said, and I said, go abroad. That's my answer. Go, get out of here, go abroad. So she went to Spain. And she lived in Spain for a semester as a student. And oh my gosh, did she have a difficult time. And she went through what we say is our classic cross-cultural problems. So class-cultural adaptation theory, it's a struggle that we all have for internal equilibrium when we are faced with adversarial external conditions. So this happens with all of us. Whenever we're in a situation that is difficult, we have to or we don't understand, we have to somehow create sense of it. And she had this problem. She had trouble creating sense. Our students go through a culture shock. Many of you have probably seen the culture shock curve. It's a similar idea to this. I like this cartoon because I think that we're all rooted in our ways to some extent, and this uproots us a little bit. And we have to figure out how to engage differently. And so she did. And so her story has a really happy ending too. So she came back. She ended up living in Spain, Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador, living, working, and now she's in international education and she's an international student advisor. And so all she does every day is work with all these students that were so awful because she realized that, well, because it was transformative, because it changes your brain. It really changes your brain. When you have to adjust the way you think and the way you react, your brain changes and you're not the same person. It's that intercultural competence. And student mobility can make that happen. All right, so I'm just about to the end here. So what now? What does this mean and how do we deal with this? All the tumultuous times that are going on. And I've already shown you this slide, but I want to remind you that I want something. I think I should have it. It's not that I want it. I think I should have it. I don't have it. Somebody must have taken it away from me. And it's going to be this group, in this case, immigrants, and so I got to stop this. So what we do is we circle the wagon. So when we feel threatened, when we feel in pain, have you all heard that term, or is that just, okay, good. Sometimes I say terms and people go, that must be a Southern thing. So this is not a Southern thing, I'm glad to know. We circle the wagons. So when we get threatened, when we get in pain, when we get scared, when we feel that things aren't as good as they should be, we become protective. We say we go home, right? You go home to mom when things are difficult, or you go to your friends, or you do practice self-care, which is not a bad thing, but we become more insular. I think what our nation is doing right now is we're circling the wagons. People who are feeling scared and who are feeling threatened, and I'm talking about people in Southeast Missouri who are farmers, who are my family, who are they're looking inward instead of outward because that's safe and that's known. And that's something that they can possibly control as change is happening. And I'm picking on Southeast Missouri because that's where my family's from, but it's happening in Ohio. It's everywhere. I mean, it's all throughout the United States right now. We're circling the wagons. And I think Brene Brown, I don't know if any of you are familiar with her, but she's a professor at the University of Houston, and she's a social scientist. And she says that right now we're in a crisis of connection, that we're having trouble connecting to people. And that's where this global diversity comes in. And that the way that we're able to think poorly about others, so poorly, and say such awful things about others, is we dehumanize these groups. We treat them as less than human, and therefore we can treat them poorly. And some of this is social media. Social media is great. I give examples from it. I like to look at it, but we don't have accountability on social media, right? Because we could say what we want and nobody gets back to us or calls us out on it. Or they do, but we really don't care because we don't really know them because they're only the friend of a friend of a friend of a friend who we really don't know. So there's a lack of connection, a lack of accountability, and it's caused a crisis of connection. Anybody watch Westworld? Anybody have seen Westworld? So it's a show on HBO, and I had to stop watching it. Basically what it is it's people pay lots of money to go to this fake world that is set up that has robots as the actors in the fake world, but the robots look like people, and they can live out their fantasies. All right? The reason I couldn't watch it is almost all of the fantasies that they showed were to go on a murder spree or to go rape somebody. Or, I mean, they were horrible fantasies that these people had in this West world. Like, they paid money to be able to go do this to robots because robots didn't care and there's no accountability in your real life. Now, I don't think that's where we are right now. I don't think we're that extreme. But I think that that's that idea of they dehumanized because they were robots. They could do horrible things that they would not do to people. But I think that's what Brene Brown argues is what's happening, that we're dehumanizing people around us. But we can come out of a crisis of connection through global diversity. That true belonging and real connection and real empathy requires meeting people in real space and real time. And I think this applies to global diversity and having students here from other countries so that we can widen our way of seeing and studying abroad. So, oh, thank you. I was waiting. So my last quick story, and I'm done, is about me. And so this is my Girl Scout troop in the 10th grade, and we went to Mexico. And when we were in, this was before aging myself here, no internet, no anything like that. So for 2 years, I sold over 1,000 boxes of cookies every year for 3 years actually, to be able to raise the money. We raised every penny to go to Mexico. I'd never been on a plane. I'd never really done anything. And we didn't need a passport to go. We got out encyclopedias to do research. We went to the library to do research. We had a banker come and teach us about money, about what money was in Mexico, which we had no idea. There was no idea of this. And we went to Mexico for 2 weeks. And I remember everything about that trip. I still, to this day, in my mind, have never had food as good as I had during those 2 weeks. I mean, it was this idyllic in my mind. And one of the things that I remember thinking is, this isn't the only time in my life I'm ever going to be able to leave the United States. I need to absorb every piece of this. I will never get this opportunity again. And obviously transformative. Later, I joined the Peace Corps, and I went to China. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without going to Mexico to know I could, because it was my second time on an airplane when I went to China. So I went to China and had this amazing experience, and I could spend 3 hours telling you about that. But I learned so much and met so many people and transformed. And it helped to not only inform my career, but my outlook on life, because I went through those identity things. So when we think of global diversity in tumultuous times, it doesn't really matter that it's tumultuous times. It matters that we're talking about people and connections between people and global connections between people so that people can grow and be the best that they can possibly be. And that's a little idealistic, I'm aware, but I do think that it is true. And I think that that's what we should strive for, and that's why it's important. So thank you for having me.
So now the floor is open for you to ask questions of Mo.
Yes.
Just on the presence of international students on campus and our Southeast Missouri friends, do you hear, oh, of course colleges want international students, they're full pay?
Absolutely.
And what's your response to that?
Well, usually I get that question after, well, what did you do during the summer? Because surely you had summers off. So usually those go together about my working on a college campus. But, well, there's truth to that. I mean, a lot of international students are full pay students. But I also bring up the fact that a lot of them aren't, and that there are a lot of scholarships, and there's a lot of open, especially on our campus, we provide financial aid for students, and I always talk about that. But I don't deny that some are full pay, but so are some of our domestic students. And so I try to balance that to show that, yeah, but we still have standards, and the standards are important. It's not, I mean, it's been an inside higher ed, and there's lots of articles about how cash cows, international students are cash cows.
It's a way of dehumanizing.
Right, it's a way of dehumanizing, exactly.
So, I want to talk about diversity in a different light and then bring it to the cultural light that you're talking about, because so often we address diversity as a problem. We have to address the fact that people don't get along. What I celebrate is the notion of the power of diversity. The model is ecosystems. In evolution, the fact that there are diverse biological creatures living in a particular environment actually is where most of the creativity and energy comes to develop new life forms. So my question to you is, what evidence is there that when you create a diverse university campus or a diverse whatever, in actual fact, more emerges out of that cultural space that is in fact transformative? A warning lesson is the United States. We're a pretty diverse immigrant-based country, and yet we do not seem to have currently taken advantage of the fact that we have all that internal diversity to address perhaps what we should be doing in terms of leadership in the world where that diversity might be an advantage. So I've actually asked a very complicated question, but
You have.
What's the power of diversity? I mean, where does it take us?
So anybody seen the musical Hamilton, know the musical Hamilton, or familiar with it? So I think of the line in Hamilton, there's a line in Hamilton where they say, immigrants, we get the job done. And a lot of some of the people that were working on the Declaration and forming our government were actually immigrants. And I think that goes with the problem-solving idea, that you have a lot of different ideas that come together to problem solve, to create something new that's better than a lot of people from the same background. And I think we have seen a lot of that in the United States. I think, and that brings me back to the idea, is I think we're regressing a little bit, but I'm hoping that regression of circling the wagons is, that 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that we're in a 1 step back, but that's going to push us forward even further. But I don't, and this is obviously my opinion, I don't think that we are lacking that creativity. I think that there's still that power and diversity. I just think we have to sometime create vehicles for that to happen.
So one answer to your question is the work of Scott Page. He's at the University of Michigan, and he's written about, I can't remember the name of his book. I don't know if it's The Power of Diversity or The Value of Diversity, but he talks about how diversity in teams creates, you mentioned it, creates successes and breakthroughs that otherwise would not happen. We've had them in this country, but I would argue that the circling the wagons is not new. That circling the wagons has been the tendency to demonize. I say demonize, you say dehumanize.
Well, Brene Brown says it, not me. I give credit.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. The tendency to dehumanize, as she said, or to demonize the other, has been a pattern in this country for a long time. And therefore, you don't get to learn what you could learn because you've already decided, oh, well, they're less than, or they don't have as much to contribute. So the work in this country has always been, how can we help you? I loved your chart about situation, support, self-situation.
Oh, Schlossberg's
support.
theory?
Yeah, that one was a perfect slide for another way of viewing people. Instead of deciding, oh, you're this skin color, or you're that gender, or you're from that country, therefore, we're gonna have to give you stuff to help bring you up to the level where we are. What if we said, tell me about how your situation, tell me what resources being in that neighborhood gave you for coping. And if we began talking with people that way, we might be able to see the value. So I think we've already benefited from the value, but if we don't foreground it, we don't get to know it. Some of what we consider the richness of University Circle culturally is because there's all kind of people living in University Circle. But if you only focus on one set of people, you don't get to know it. So the circling the wagons is not new. I think but I think we've seen it in cycles, and it comes and goes. So I think, but I would recommend Scott Page's, I'm gonna send you the link to Scott Page's book here. Because that's an example of research. There's a lot of research, but that is the book that comes to mind where he's done research at the University of Michigan. to suggest what you get when you have a diverse research group, for example, or a diverse collective doing anything, problem solving, as Molly said.
Molly, I appreciate so much how you describe this and talk about global. The United States is in many ways acting like a global piece within themselves. We forget that everybody who first came here was immigrants. The original people were Native Americans who, because of their skills, what they had, helped everybody else be able to stay here and survive. But then, Native Americans got everything taken away. So we see throughout history, we've had these things happen. So I think when people feel like you said something's going to be taken away, rather than how do I share this in a way that we all need each other even more, we do just the opposite. It's kind of like, this is mine. You're not going to get this from me. Rather than, well, can you help me share this? Because with this, we all learn all these new things how to do better. That's just not the mindset for some reason, you know, for many people. And it's almost like you think of people like, ultimately, everybody, your brother and sister, since you all started the same place. We don't do that very well. Because that means somebody's, I thought I was more. Oh, I thought I was less. It's always about more and less, regardless of anything, rather than how can we not exist with each other. So I think your two friends who told the story, it's a wonderful story. Because it didn't seem like that was part of it.
It wasn't. Have you guys read the Dr. Seuss book, The Sneetches? Are you familiar with that book? So, okay, I have little kids, so I'm really familiar with Dr. Seuss. But The Sneetches is about these Dr. Seuss creatures, and some have the plain belly Sneetches and the Sneetches with a star up on theirs. And they go through the whole thing and about how the ones with the star thinks they're better than the ones with the plain belly. And so somebody comes and puts the star on the plain belly, and so then they're like, hey, we all have stars. So then the star ones go through the machine and come out, and they now don't have a star, and now it's cooler to not have the star. And it goes back and forth until it happens so fast that they can't remember who started with stars and who didn't. And half of them have stars and half of them don't, but they can't remember which group. And so in Dr. Seuss's world, now they all get along. And now they're all together because they're so blended. And I think about that as a story a lot when I think about global diversity, because any diversity really, but global diversity is what I'm interested in for this, about how that's the ideal. I don't know that happens. I don't think it often happens, but it's an ideal.
Something funny and random that I thought about with the Sneak story. The tumultuous part of the story was the guy who was selling the stars, or the guy who had the machine to remove stars. Because in the story also, part of the reason why they started getting along was because they all ran out of money to go through the machine. So the guy who had the machine said, oh, peace, I'm out. And everyone had to figure out how they would cope with each other and how they would live with themselves.
It's good. So he's the tumultuous times right there. That's good. I should have added that, darn it.
So I have a question. Don't you think part of our desire to circle the wagons, well, I don't know how to ask my question. I'm just curious about that moment when you ask the women, do they have to wear their burqas? What do we get if we don't want people to do that? I'm not asking it very well, but don't you think that's a common question? You know, what do you have to do to get to be more like us? What if we just said, I like your burqa. I don't wear those, but wow, burqas are cool. As opposed to, there's a tendency, I think, to say, well, okay, you've been here 5 years, are you gonna stop wearing it yet? You know, we have a desire, I think, to want assimilation.
Sure.
How do you feel about that?
So I think that the transformed me, who's still transforming and learning, would never ask that question today. And I would also never look out the window and go, oh my gosh, who are these people? And they look funny. You know, I mean, I think that we change and I think we learn, and that's what global diversity does. I think it wasn't offensive that I asked the question because we had developed such a good friendship, and I didn't go up to them and say, hey, why are you wearing, you know, it was in a time of they had also asked me why I wore shorts at some point too. So we were kind of in that conversation, you know. So it was that kind of conversation that I could ask a question that was really personal and maybe a little bit inappropriate and get an answer. I don't know that, I think you're right. I think that it is that desire to, why aren't you more like me? And I think we do, I think that's probably a natural way that everybody has. Of why, you know, because it's that situation. I like Schlossberg's theory too, because that situational. What situations do you have to bring to it that help to inform you as you move to the new one? But yeah, I think that you're right. It's that idea of why can't you be more like me?
One of your first slides was about where other countries are also in this sort of, to use your word, tumultuous, going through tumultuous times. Can you talk a little bit about the same kinds of issues that we go through on our campus or we see in the U.S. In other places? Because, you know, as you said, in places like Japan and China, almost by definition, there's an anti-immigrant bias.
Right.
And how, when our students go abroad or students from other countries go to those countries, how are they accepted or not, and how do we compare to some of those other places?
So
Does everybody know him?
No, but I'm getting.
Say who he is.
This is David Fleschler, the Vice Provost for International Affairs, and putting me on the spot right now. But I think it's that's a lot in that question. There was, have you all seen the meme with? You all know what a meme is, right? So, David, you know what a meme is? Okay, so, yeah, so you know, have you seen the meme where it's Great Britain and they're holding. And they're drinking with the U.S. and Great Britain says, we've got Brexit. And the U.S. says, here, hold my beer. You know, I'm going to do something worse than Brexit, you know, that idea. And I think that I always cracked up about that I can top you in crisis going on. But, you know, I think Brexit is an example where the UK wants to break away. They don't want to be a part of something. We've seen it in Germany in the elections recently with Merkel of groups competing for power that have not competed in recent past. As far as our students studying abroad, I actually think they're a little bit oblivious to it, and I'm not sure that they're directly affected by any of this. They become aware while they're there because they talk to people, and they start to realize people talk about political situations and what's happening because it's their country, and so they have this. I don't know that we're seeing it in, like when I work with our partners, I don't see any sense of stay away or come close. I see our partners kind of doing what we're doing, trying to be as welcoming and as come to us as at the university level. But I think that's because we haven't seen a lot of things there's a lot of things happening, nothing's taken complete hold yet. But I haven't seen it impact our students at all, our students studying abroad. Now, were you just thinking about the students from China coming here? Right, I saw your face and I thought that's what she's thinking about. We have seen students from China coming here talking more defensive about not getting respect. And so Chinese students who have been offended by things that maybe in the past they would not have been offended by, and saying you have to respect me, and that word respect keeps coming up. And I don't know, Elizabeth and I, this is Elizabeth Miller, she's our international assistant director for international student services and our international student advocate, and has many years, many more than I do, experience living in China. And I wonder if there's political pressures for students to be more, to have stronger ties to the motherland. I'm trying to think of how, I can think of it in Chinese and I can't think of it in English, and the word for China in Chinese is 中国, which is middle country. And basically and I think that we're seeing in China more pulling together as more insular too. So even though China already has an anti-immigration, I mean, I don't know that they would call it that, but we're seeing a little bit more national identity. That's what I'm trying to say. National identity, we think. That's what Elizabeth and I have talked about coming out of our Chinese students. So that's something that we're seeing.
Can I add one other
Go
thought?
for it.
Just to address how our students may be treated. One example, coming out of China, coming out of time I spent in Korea, is that we're treated very well as guests.
As guests.
You are, and so like there's in China there's 中国人, Chinese people, 外国人, outside country people. So you're welcome here as a guest, but you are an outside country person, which means you don't get to comment on certain aspects of our life. You don't get to comment on politics. You don't know what it's like. You're an outside country person. So you're treated very well. I had a lot of privilege in China being a foreigner, but I was still a foreigner, and that delineation is very clear.
Well, I was wondering if, because all these different countries are looking at how our country is shaping certain things going on, right now there's a lot of disrespect that people are seeing in our country. So I'm wondering if that may have some impact on students coming here thinking, I see how your country is responding and developing. I don't want you to treat me that way. That's not okay. I think that has anything to do with people coming here thinking that, because they see this happening here, and we don't necessarily treat people.
Maybe. I for Chinese, I think it's their leader right now who is espousing some political rhetoric about nationalism and pride and go to these other countries, but remember you're Chinese and that you deserve this level of whatever. I think that for the Chinese students, I mean, and I'm not, and again, I hate to say all students because it's just a few. We're starting to see a little bit of this language. And so we don't know if it's a trend. We don't know if it's all or if it's, but it's an interesting thing that we're looking at. So we're watching it to see and changing our language as a result. So initiating conversation with using the word respect in language, because that's a word so we're reflecting that back. And so we're trying to think through those things of how we can do that. But I don't know, it might be, but I don't think so. But
do you see our students, especially our undergraduate students, as very interested in the international students that are here? I've often thought of, I studied abroad, and I thought people were so interested in the United States and what we did, lots of questions. But I always felt when I came back that we were not as interested in the students. I noticed them when I came back because you realize you identify with that role.
right.
And I wondered, I often see students in groups, they don't seem to be intermingling as much. And what's your view?
I don't see U.S. students as interested in international students. And one of the things that I had in here, and I took it out, was that we can't just bring international students here. We have to figure out ways to engage international students and to engage our U.S. students with our international students. It's not just one-sided. We can't have the expectation just international students is how you get involved. It's U.S. students is how you take advantage of these opportunities and you get involved. I think you're right, and I certainly experienced that when I lived abroad. I was special, but I don't know that our international students here feel special. And I think sometimes it's a nuisance because now I have to be in a group with people from other countries, and it's a little bit harder in group work, and so I have to struggle through it. And so I think that that's something that we need to work on. And some of it, going to get in trouble here. Some of it, I think we have to train faculty how to work with international students in their classrooms so that they can model behavior that works. And so I think that it's not just training our students, it's training faculty and training staff. I'm not picking on faculty on how to be more culturally connected. But yeah, I think it's an observation I've had as well.
Can't resist to do a plug for research at this point, because when the faculty are engaged in research with their postdocs, graduate students, and undergrads, those are very diverse teams often. And And so there really is a lot of interaction. And students really do talk about that too in some of their reflection papers that we ask them to do at the end of the summer. That it gives them that opportunity to work closely in a way that they may not have done so in the past.
Yeah, I originally had in here too. I had a lot of things I took out, and it was still long. Kolb's theory of experiential learning, because I think that that's where you bring groups to, you can change and bring groups together. But
And I don't think you were out of bounds at all to say faculty and staff need this appreciation as well, because that's where the students are interacting. And so it's not, they're not just interacting with one another, but they're interacting with faculty and
Right.
staff. And so this appreciation that you're talking about is, you use the word multi-directional, so I
Right.
agree with you. So, anyway, can we thank her again?
Yes.
thank you.